Well, thank you all for coming tonight. This is going to be a great talk. Let me just tell you a little bit about Friends of Merrymeeting Bay, because I think I see some folks who've not been here before. I won't make you raise your hands, but I think I see folks who've not been here before. So let me just give you just a little brief thing about FOMB to spare the people who have been here before. Friends of Merrymeeting Bay is a very holistic organization. We're a land trust, but we're a land trust who works with everything, and that includes protecting the air and the soil and the water that is on the land and surrounds the bay as well. So we really believe in a lot of various things, including research and advocacy, conservation, and education. So for research and advocacy right now, we're doing a lot of things. We're working on the Presumpscot to make sure that the fish passage down there is not compromised, and there's a problem with that right now. I won't go into details, but I'm sure you can read about it in our newsletter if you so choose. There's dredging down on the Kennebec for the second time in just a couple of years, which is a problem for the endangered species who are going to be migrating during the time they're going to be dredging. We took it to federal court last time. We lost, but we're going to try again so that doesn't happen. The alewife run is coming up any minute now, and we've worked on alewives for years and years and helped open the St. Croix to alewives for the first time in decades just a couple of years ago, and we'll continue to work that because they're still trying to close that down. And our water quality monitoring starts this weekend, Easter weekend, the rising of the fish. Easter weekend, where we continue to work on all of the rivers, all 6 rivers that go into the bay. And we've been trying for several years now to upgrade the Androscoggin River, which is already at Class B, although it's registered at Class C. And the Clean Water Act basically demands that if we reach Class B, it needs to be raised to Class B. We just need to tell the legislators that that's the law, so that's how it needs to go. So we're going to keep doing that, and we will continue to monitor as long as that takes, and beyond that as well, as we have done on the Kennebec, which was upgraded about a decade ago. Conservation, we're working on a couple of easements right now. We've protected a lot of land around the bay. We will continue to do that. And education, we do a lot on education. We do outreach to all of the schools around the bay, from now preschool, starting this last year, up through junior high school. We actually also have been in the high schools a little bit. We have a Bay Day coming up. For those of you who don't know, we get the kids out of the classroom, away from the fluorescents, away from their devices, away from their desks, and onto the land and into mud flats and doing fish seining and fish printing and wigwam building, and we get them with their feet wet and their hands dirty. And anyone who is interested at all in helping us do that, it's May 16th, and we have about 50 volunteers who help us every year, both for teaching the classes and helping us get 250 kids from one place to another, which is no small task. And we're always grateful for the people who help us do that, one of whom just came through the door, and there are others who have also helped us do that, both teaching and helping us get kids from one place to another. We also do in-class teaching with all of the elementary schools, mostly, again, as I said, from pre-K through high school. And we teach all kinds of things, but mostly it's about how to get kids connected into Merrymeeting Bay and thus their local environmental areas. So if you're interested in that at all, please, by all means, contact me. And if you're interested in water quality monitoring, there are a few, maybe 1 or 2 places that we need some help with that. And the speaker series. So we do this every year. We do it from October through May. And then just before I start on this one, let me say that next month, May 10th, is Dragonflies and Damselflies in Maine, which features ecologist and zoologist Dr. Ron Butler from the University of Maine at Farmington. So please come to that. It's right here at not the University of Maine. It's right here at the Curtis Memorial Library. And when we do these, it costs about $1,000 a year to do the speaker series that we do. Patagonia has been really wonderful in helping and donating goods to us so that we can then basically auction it off to you, so that helps us pay for the $1,000 a year. This is the one we're doing this year, this month rather. So what we'd like you to do is to help us pay for this. You will fill out put your name on this on a sheet of paper from here. You will put the money in this little guy here, and then we will pass this around so everyone gets a chance to do that. $5 as a minimum would be great. $1,000 would be better. We take checks, so please feel free to do that. And then we also, just so we know what things we do in our speaker series work and which ones don't, we pass this around so you can just sign up so we know that maybe 30 people came this time, maybe 150 people came next time. So we're just asking you to just sign up there so we know what works and what doesn't. And I'll start this over on this side.
Money in the basket, name in the tin. Right.
Money in the basket, name in the tin. So I said that backwards. So same difference in the end. It'll all go in the same place. So I would just like to introduce our speaker for tonight. Really excited about this. Chris Spatz is a former psychiatric social worker and the director of the Gunks Climbers Coalition, as well as president of the Cougar Rewilding Foundation. He writes and lectures about the natural history of the Catskill Mountains and the Shawangunk Ridge, where he lives in southern New York State, and where he caught the spell of fabled eastern cougar. Chris has run remote camera surveys at High Point State Park in New Jersey and the Shawangunks of New York at Minnewaska State Park and the Mohonk Preserve. Reviewing his survey findings of cougar biology, behavior in the current range, Chris will explain why cougar sightings don't produce evidence and how restorations of this magnificent predator are imperative for the recovery of critically declining eastern forests. Please, welcome Chris Spatz. Thank you very much. Thanks, Chris. And the mic. Thank you.
Thank you, Kathleen. So do you need a test on this, Ed?
No.
Okay. Thank you, Kathleen, for that wonderful introduction. And it sounds like you guys are doing really important work. I want to thank the Friends of Merry Meeting Bay for sponsoring me tonight, and for Ed for contacting me, and for the Curtis Memorial Library.
I think you need to speak up a bit.
Okay.
I need to go get the tech person because the volume is actually in that locked room there.
Okay, all right. Are you getting anything from the microphone?
Yes.
Okay, all right, okay. So I just need to be very close to it.
Yeah.
I saw Louis C.K. do something with this recently, and I don't want to go there, but...
If you need to, you can slide the mic further, closer to you.
Okay.
There too.
I think, yeah, it's on. Okay. So I always start off my talks with this question. How many people in the room have seen a mountain lion? A wild, okay. So generally about a quarter or a third of each one of my audiences has had an experience with a mountain lion. And I want to say that if you've had that kind of experience, please understand that and you'll probably know that this is can be the most rare experiences with wildlife anybody can ever have. Right? These experiences very much are transforming for a lot of people. Unfortunately, folks want to talk to me about and try to confirm their sighting, and I can't do that because I wasn't there, and I wish I could, but I can't do that. So, and please understand, I'm going to talk a lot about sightings tonight, and how we get lots of good reports from very good sources. Talking about a big cat with a big long tail. But there is very little evidence to support those sightings on the East Coast. And I'm going to talk about why there's that big disparity between sightings and between evidence. Can you still... You okay back there?
Oh, yeah, you're coming...
Yeah. Okay, I just wanted to see if Ed had a question back there.
Oh, she has it.
Okay, okay. So yeah, cherish that experience, but... I just want to qualify that I wish I could support your experience, and I wish I could, but I can't. So we'll spend a lot of time talking about those sightings. So the talk is called Bringing Back the Legend, Cougar Recovery in Eastern North America. We're going to talk about the history of mountain lions, cougars on the East Coast, their current status, and recovery, about what it will take to bring them back. And my name is Chris Spatz, and when I'm not bartending at the Mohonk Mountain House, I'm the president of the Cougar Rewilding Foundation. So our game plan, we're going to talk about the history of the foundation, how we were started. My personal story, how I got into this, because obviously if I'm bartending, I'm not a biologist. The search about trying to find evidence of mountain lions on the East Coast. And then ecology and recovery. And then we'll do questions and answers at the end. So if you have any questions, please hold them off until the end of the talk. I'm going to ask you a few questions during the talk, but again, if you have anything you want to ask me, save it for the end. Okay, so Todd Lester was a young coal miner and a houndsman living in southern West Virginia, where Todd still lives. And one day, back in the early 1980s, Todd was out looking for one of his lost dogs. And he was walking up a trail, came around a corner, and was suddenly face to face with a mountain lion, with a cougar. And they looked at each other for a couple seconds, which probably felt like a few minutes for Todd. And then the cat just turned around and went right back up the trail. And Todd has described his experience ever since then this way. He said, when that cougar turned tail, a piece of my soul went with it. Now, when Todd had his experience, nobody really knew what the status of the eastern cougar was. They were thought to have been wiped out largely by the end of the 19th century. A lot of states had bounty programs in place meant to eradicate them. So anybody who wanted to could have shot one. But the only one we have turning up on the East Coast, north of Florida, through the first 50 years of the 20th century was where? Somerset County, Maine, 1938. What we believe was the last wild cougar taken in the Mid-Atlantic and New England. Bob Downing, a biologist for the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, tried to find them unsuccessfully in the southern Appalachian Mountains. And Rainer Brock, a biologist from New York State, tried to find them unsuccessfully in New York and New England. People, of course, continued to see them and report them throughout the century. And by the 1960s and early 70s, a couple of them did turn up. One was shot in Pennsylvania. One turned up dead in the Adirondacks. So when the Endangered Species Act was established in 1973, the eastern cougar was considered an endangered species. This is a map of our sister organization, the Cougar Network. You may have seen this out there. And these are confirmations, physical evidence of cougars outside their known breeding areas. So this is where we know they're breeding, out west. You've got these pocket populations in the western Dakotas and Nebraska. And these dots represent evidence, not sightings, but physical evidence like bodies, photographs, tracks, scat. Almost all of these confirmations are young males moving out of these source colonies, going east, looking for females. Very often we have multiple confirmations of single individuals. And these guys just keep going until something stops them, because the females tend to stay much closer to where they're born. And these guys just keep going hundreds and hundreds of miles. These confirmations also represent a 25-year period, and what we think is that almost all of them are dead. Okay, so this is kind of a graveyard of... Yes?
I'm sorry, sometimes I can't hear you.
Okay, so I need to...
Turn off this mic here. Turn that one off.
I think he needs that for the roof. Okay.
It's giving us an echo.
Okay.
I can't hear you.
It's giving us an echo.
So, can I turn this one off? That might help. So you're using that one?
Is your volume on?
Yeah.
That's an interesting map you got there, Chris. I see the big white blank spot on the East Coast and all the dots in the middle there, and all of a sudden there's a few here and there. It's interesting how that
I'm going
sliding
to be talking about those in a second.
Those are confirmed, though.
Yes, they are. Yep.
Let me just see if I've increased it at all.
Testing. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10.
Better?
Better? So I just need to keep my mouth right next to this thing. Okay.
I'm also turning it up.
Okay.
So.
Well, that helps too.
Is that good, Kathy, or no?
It's getting better.
Getting better.
As long as he talks right into the microphone.
Chris, you could experiment with not using that and just talking loudly if you could. I'm just suggesting.
Yeah.
You gotta have it right up to your mouth.
How do I turn it off? Where is the...
Volume on there used to be in the back.
So how do you hear me when I'm talking like this? Can everyone hear me okay? I actually prefer to do it that way, so, okay. But you have this then still, right?
Yeah, we're good. But
Okay.
We have one woman here who really,
Okay.
she won't be able to hear.
I think everybody said they...
Can you hear him when he's just speaking by himself?
Okay.
Okay.
All right, so
All right.
Okay,
that's, how do I turn it off?
that's it.
Okay,
Good.
all right. Phew. I can get closer now, too. I can walk around. Okay. All right, now I feel better. I don't like podiums. All right, so as the gentleman back there was pointing out, you have all these confirmations in the Midwest, very few in the Northeast and the East Coast. 3 of these are from one animal, the cat that was killed in Connecticut in 2011, who you may have heard about. Todd, our founder, did find tracks in southern West Virginia in the early 90s. He made casts of those tracks. He had them confirmed by several biologists, but because the biologists didn't see the tracks in the ground, it's not considered an official confirmation. Okay, in 1999, Todd and a writer from Virginia named Chris Bulgiano, who has written a couple of cougar books, formed the Eastern Cougar Foundation. They set up a board of directors, including some of the top cougar biologists in the country. They started a website and a newsletter. They began soliciting sightings, following up reports, trying to find evidence when they could. They also began working with state and federal agencies to try to document cougar presence using remote wildlife cameras. They also set up a set of missions and goals, including to promote the recovery of breeding populations of cougars east of the Rockies, to promote legal protection for all cougars living in the wild east of the Rockies, to conduct public education programs like this one, to do habitat assessments and public attitude surveys, and then to evaluate evidence and conduct investigations to document cougar presence. So this used to be, when we were formed, our first objective, to try to document evidence. And that's changed over the years. And as we go through the talk, I hope you begin to get a sense about why that's changed. Okay, so how did I get into this? I've been rock climbing in the Gunks since the early 80s. That's a picture of me on a route called Shockley's Ceiling. And if you look close, but not too close, you'll see that I'm not wearing anything. This was 1985, part of my misspent youth. You can't call yourself a gunkie unless you've done Shockley's Ceiling in traditional style. So that's what I was doing back in 1985. I don't do that anymore. I don't rock climb as much as I used to, but that's what I was doing back in the 1980s. The entire time I've been climbing at the Shawanggunks, I've been hearing reports of mountain lions on the ridge. So when I moved there in 2000, one of my ambitions was to try to find evidence, or track, scat, deer kills, to document cougar presence, or maybe even see one. I began collecting reports. By 2006, I had 50 sightings in the Gunks and the Catskills, some of them going back to the 1950s. Wrote an article about it for a local newsletter suggesting with all these sightings that cougars had to be here. But I couldn't get close enough to one of these reports to try to find evidence, to try to find tracks or scat or deer kills, until I read about a couple down in Vernon, New Jersey. This is an hour south of the Gunks, right on the edge of the New York-New Jersey border, the Wallkill National Wildlife Refuge. This couple had an experience in their backyard with what they described was a mother cougar and her nearly adult-sized cub. So I drove down to Vernon. I interviewed the Fitzgeralds. And then I began driving down there a couple days a week because Sean Fitzgerald was a cop in town. And they kept getting reports of these same two cats throughout that summer. So Sean would feed me a report. I'd get down there within a couple of hours or a day to try to find evidence. I bought my first remote wildlife camera. I set that up in their backyard, right on the edge of the Wallkill Refuge, and I got pictures of these little guys the first day. So I was psyched because the camera worked. And if you know anything about northern New Jersey, you may have heard it's got one of the densest black bear populations in North America now. They are everywhere, especially in a town like Vernon. So I'd be driving around, following up cougar reports, knocking on people's doors, and they'd say, nope, no mountain lion, but that black bear came right down the street again this morning, right past the school bus stop. I'm like, right past the school bus stop? And you're okay with that? I said, yeah, we're used to them by now. I was like, holy cow. I grew up an hour southwest of here. We did not have black bears in my town growing up. So I was blown away that people in the suburbs of New Jersey, 40 miles from Times Square, had gotten used to living with these 400, 600, 800-pound animals. These guys get huge in New Jersey. And I thought, wow, if we can live with them, black bears do more damage and kill more people than mountain lions do. Maybe we can live with mountain lions too. By that fall, I hadn't gotten any pictures, didn't find any other evidence, but began getting reports further west at High Point State Park at the northern tip of New Jersey. So I sat down with the park superintendent, got permission from the Division of Fish and Wildlife, and in December of 2006, I set up a couple of cameras in the park. Now, cougars, just like dogs and wolves, will use urine and scat to mark their territory. So I went to a local zoo, got myself a 20-pound bag of cougar poo, and put that out in front of the cameras as a lure. And dogs were attracted to it. Deer were attracted to it. People were attracted to it. But by the end of that year, no tracks, no scat, no deer kills, no pictures. That's a roadkill. So I brought up my report, packed up the cameras, moved them an hour north to Minnewaska State Park in the Gunks. That's one of the cameras right there. It's my friend Bob O'Brien. Bob is the invasive species specialist. We skied out in December of 2007 to set up the cameras, and of course I forgot to bring these out. So, all right, 1 second. Sorry about this.
Chris, the Gunks are in the Adirondacks?
The Gunks are about an hour and a half north of New York City, on the eastern edge of the Catskills. I apologize for not clarifying that. So this is a very old camera. The technology has come quite a way since then. These are motion sensitive, so when an animal gets to within about 40 feet, it trips a flash, which takes a picture on a memory card. So we put out the cougar poo, got pictures of everything except mountain lions. Had them out there for a year. Packed them up again, moved them a little bit further north to the Mohonk Preserve, which surrounds the Mohonk Mountain House. This is where I work. Those are the Catskills back there. See, it's the Front Range back there. So I also began running an ad in a local newspaper, and I had, soliciting cougar reports. I've had a dozen reports right in this valley, which is called the Clove Valley. This is about 1,000 feet below the hotel, just west of it. This is 3 miles from where I live. A dozen cougar reports right in this valley. Right, so I set up one of the cameras in this hemlock grove right behind the actor Aidan Quinn's house. Aidan lives down there, Mandy Patinkin, Steve Buscemi, Harvey Keitel, Melissa Leo, Michelle Williams, Daniel Craig.
Wow.
This valley's lousy with actors and mountain lion reports. By this time I had run out of the cougar poo, so I begun reading that perfumes like Obsession for Men work really well as a wildlife lure. So I got some of that, put it out in front of the cameras, and it attracted everything. Porcupine, fisher, that's a big weasel reintroduced to the Catskills and the Gunks 40 years ago to control the porcupines. Red fox, gray fox, coyote.
Doing yoga.
Right.
Downward coyote.
Turkey. Okay, bear cubs, there's 2 of them there. And there's Mama Bear rolling around the Obsession for Men. Another year, no tracks, no scat, no deer kills, no pictures.
But you had hooked up with her. How long were you in relationship?
I want to keep that on the side. So I joined the Eastern Cougar Foundation in 2006, where I've been very fortunate to have been tutored by some of the top cougar biologists in the world, in the country. And where I learned pretty quickly that their experience has pretty much been like mine, but they've been doing this for a lot longer and over an area from Nova Scotia to Mississippi. Okay, the foundation was formed in 1999. Some of them have been at this for much longer than that, since the 60s and 70s. In all of that time, we have one piece of evidence of mountain lions on the East Coast, which we've got before it was confirmed by a state agency. So as we go through the talk, I hope you begin to get a sense about why it's so hard to find evidence despite all of these sightings. Okay, so let's talk about these cats. Their history and evolution, their range, their habitat, biology, human predation, because people say, why do you want to bring a cat back that eats people? Hoaxes, we get lots of those. Photographs taken out west, and the Midwest reported to be from the East Coast. Sightings, evidence, and then ecology. Okay, cougars have the widest range of any terrestrial animal in the Western Hemisphere. They're a native to the Western Hemisphere. And because of that wide range, they have lots of regional names, including mountain lion, puma, cougar, painter, panther, catamount, something like 150 at last count. There are 6 subspecies. They are all classified under the genus Puma. And one of their closest cousins is the cheetah, okay, which were once native to North America, as were lions, as were saber-toothed cats, and dire wolves, and mammoths, and mastodons, and camels, and giant sloths, and giant beavers. And when I was growing up, we were taught that these animals all died off at the end of the last ice age because the weather changed. We now know that's not the case, because these animals all survived multiple warming and cooling trends. What they couldn't survive, apparently, was man's first presence in North America. Clovis man came across the Bering Strait, probably with hunting dogs, began knocking out all the prey species, began knocking out the mammoths and the mastodons and the camels and the giant sloths, which left nothing for these big predators to eat. The cougars that are here now recolonized from Central America during the last 10,000 years. Melanie Culver, one of our former directors, is a geneticist who did a study in the mid-1990s, and Melanie learned that what were thought to be 32 separate subspecies were actually just 6. 5 in Central and South America, and 1 in North America. So genetically, a Florida panther is no different from an eastern cougar, if we can find one, and a cougar from the Northern Rockies. Okay, their anatomy and physiology. They're adult size. The bodies are about 4 feet long. The tails are almost as long as the body. They're thick. They're ropey. They have that black tip on the end. Their weights can range from 80 pounds for a small female up to 200 pounds for a big male. They can hit speeds of 50 miles an hour. But unlike cheetahs, they don't race their prey down. They're stalk and ambush hunters. They like to get as close to them as they can using the available prey, and then they're on top of them in 1 or 2 bounds. The colors can range from light brown and gray to yellow and tawny. They have white on the belly and the chest, white on the front of the muzzle. It's kind of dark mustache. And then black on the back of the ears. Keep that in mind. We're going to talk about those ears a little bit later. That's someone's front lawn in Colorado.
That's great.
Okay, those big canines are pretty much designed to do one thing, and that's to slide between the neck vertebrae of a deer and sever its spinal column. If they can't get the deer that way, they move around to the front using a chokehold. There's video on YouTube of a cougar taking down a deer in Colorado using a chokehold, 3 minutes of video, and you can see that this struggle is over in about 40 seconds. They like to make quick, fast kills. They have to make quick, fast kills because they don't have a big lung capacity. They're not built for protracted battles. So they can't get them quick. They tend to back off, which is why they're not very successful at killing us when that happens, or when they try. Those front teeth are designed to pluck fur off the carcass. The back teeth work like scissors, cutting ribbons of meat off the carcass and swallowing them whole. Okay, their ranges. For mature animals, females have these kind of smaller, overlapping ranges, about 25 to 50 square miles. One male will patrol all that territory, breeding with the females and keeping out other males. A male's range can be between 100 and 400 square miles, depending on prey density and that kind of thing. Transients are young adults that are moving out of their mom's territory for the first time. So females stay with mom till they're about 2 years old. Then they get out of their mom's territory, move into the next male's territory or the next male, but they usually stay within 100 miles of where they're born. Young males, on the other hand, have to get out of dad's territory by the time they're about 18 months old, otherwise dad's going to kill them. Then they got to get past the next big male, the next big male, the next big male. They're all the way on the edge of the breeding habitat, looking for females and trying to establish their own territory. And again, part of why we see these guys going so far in the Midwest is because they're looking for females that aren't there. Okay, kittens are born 2 to 4 to a litter. They have blue eyes and spotted coats. They can keep those spots sometimes until they're full grown, up to 18 months. We see pictures of these young males moving into the Midwest. They're full grown, but sometimes they often have their spots on them still. Okay, cougars are opportunistic predators. They will take just about anything, but in the United States and Canada, about 80% of their diet are deer. Your average cougar will take 30 deer a year, and a female with cubs will take about 1 a week. Now, we often hear from some folks that if we bring mountain lions back to the East Coast, they're going to wipe out the deer population. Well, that's not how predator-prey dynamics work. If that was the case, they would have taken out the deer a long time ago. And New York State, for instance, we have 1 million deer. Hunters take 250,000 a year. At least 70,000 a year are killed on the roads. So we lose 1/3 of that population and replace it every single year. 100 mountain lions in the Adirondacks would take about 4,000 deer a year, which wouldn't make a dent in that population. Okay, after the kill, they pluck fur off the carcass. They neatly open the chest cavity. This is how you can tell a cat kill, because bobcats will do this also, from a wolf or a bear or a coyote kill. Those other animals tend to go at the haunches first. But cats open up the chest, feed on the liver and the heart first. When they're done feeding, they will scrape debris over the carcass, and they will sit by feeding on it and guarding it for up to a week. So all that feeding produces lots of this. Scat. And there aren't too many things out in the woods that leave a scat as big as a cougar's. They're more than 1 foot long, more than 1 inch wide, and you haven't lived until someone has sent you this in the mail for analysis, which we do get from time to time, and I've sent a few of those out myself. Okay, we often hear from people that they find tracks as big as their hand. Well, if they're that big, it can't be a cougar, because while the paws are big, that's the front paw, which is bigger than the back paw, the tracks they leave are relatively small, about 3.5 by 3 inches, smaller than the palm of your hand. Their toes are asymmetrical. They're like our hands, like our fingers. They have a lead toe like our middle finger. When you see them in the snow, you can tell left from right. I keep spelling heel wrong. All right, heel pad, 2 lobes on top, 3 lobes on the bottom. They're shaped like a fat M. And you rarely see claw marks in a cougar track because they have retractable claws, and they don't use them when they're going about their daily business. So these are some of the features we look for when people send us track photographs, and most of the time, of course, they're canine. This is Turk, our director Kerry Geikis' shepherd, next to a coyote track. And notice on the canines how the toes are symmetrical. You have clear nail indentations. Now, Turk weighs about 75 pounds, but his track is about the same size as 100-pound adult cougars. They have 1 lobe on top on the heel pad and 2 lobes on the bottom. And then you see this feature, which you don't see in cat tracks, and that's this X or star pattern between the toes and the heel pad. And here they are side by side. Okay, this is a cast taken from a commercial mold from a cougar. Okay, my hand. And there's a track as big as my hand. Okay, that's the alpha male from the first pack of wolves that re-entered the Northern Rockies in Glacier National Park back in the mid-1980s. They were called the Magic Pack. And my brother was a student at the University of Montana at the time, working with some of the biologists who were studying that pack of wolves. So they had casts of the whole pack. So he sent that to me about 30 years ago. Here they are side by side. Again, note the differences. The symmetry of the wolf on those toes, the nail indentations, the asymmetry here, no nail marks, 2 lobes here, 3 lobes there, 1 there, 2 there, and then that X or star pattern between the toes and the heel. And what's ironic is that even though these tracks are much different in size, these animals are probably about the same size, because Wolves rarely go over 100 pounds, whereas your average cougar is between 100 and 120. Right, so I'm going to pass these around for you to look at, compare. And again, the small one is the cougar track. And let's do some tracking. 5 years ago, I got myself out to the Front Range of Montana to take Jay Tischendorf's Cougar Ecology and Tracking class. Jay is a wildlife veterinarian who has worked with wolverines and bobcats. He bans golden eagles and peregrine falcons. He worked on the red wolf reintroduction in North Carolina, and he also worked on the first study of mountain lions in Yellowstone back in the 1980s. He's one of the most experienced wildlife vets in the country, and he's been my good friend and mentor for the last 10 years. That's not a bottle of Budweiser in Jay's hand. Okay. That's bear spray, because we were in grizzly country. Grizzlies, wolves, cougars, mountain goat, mountain sheep, moose, elk, wolverine, bobcat, lynx, you name it, they got it. And even though this was early February, we were getting reports the big boar grizzlies were moving out of their dens onto the prairie where they were spooking gas and surveying crews. So we kept our bear spray with us just in case. And what we were doing was simply driving up a road looking for tracks. So the first morning, got off the main road, went up a side road about a half an hour, got stuck, turned around, came back, got on the main road, and 10 minutes up that, we cut our first set, of cougar prints. 90 minutes from when we first started looking, we cut tracks. Now, from what I just told you, can you tell me, is that front or back and right or left? Right? Because you got, very good, you got the lead toe right there. Front or back?
Front?
Nope, it's the back one. It's a smaller one, 2.5 inches wide. Okay. So your rear right track. Jay's measuring the stride there, more than 40 inches, so this had to be a male. We had perfect tracking conditions, about a half inch of fresh snow. We were probably about a half hour behind him. Also, one of the features that you see in cat tracks is that they're round. Okay, canine tracks tend to be more oval. And again, we had perfect tracking conditions. Your average cougar will leave between 10 and 20,000 tracks every single day. All right? And when you see them like this, they are not hard to follow. So we got on his trail. He crossed this river, which Jay wanted to wade. And I said, there's no way I'm getting wet in Montana in February. So we found that tree, crawled across that, and as soon as we got into the woods back here, we found our first territorial scrape. And what they do is they get down on their haunches, scrape up their back legs, they make a pile, and pee on it to mark their territory. Another 100 yards past that, the mother lode, my first wild cougar poo. You have no idea how many I looked at before I saw one reel like this. It's a big moment. Again, more than a foot long, more than an inch wide. We followed his tracks up the ridge. We found one of his dens. They have, they'll have 8 or 9 of these because they're patrolling. Imagine if you're patrolling 100 square mile territory. They're not going to do that in one day. It'd take them a week to do that. So they have dens spread out all along there. So we found one of his dens. We crossed the saddle of the ridge. And we found this spot, this perch, where he stopped to survey. This is that first valley we drove up that morning. There's a house down here, house over here, horses over here. That's where his perch was, right above that house. So his tracks continued down the ridge here. And so obviously he came by after we went up this ridge, up that valley earlier. So we decided to turn around at that point. We had found 4 scrapes, 2 scats, 1 den, followed more than 1,000 tracks in just a half mile. That is more evidence than anyone has found on the East Coast in 100 years. Wow. Okay, so one morning. When you got a mountain lion around, it's not hard to find evidence.
Where is this?
The Front Range of Montana, the north, southeast of the Bob Marshall Wilderness.
Right.
Okay. Next day, different location. Jay said, start looking. Cut tracks in 5 minutes. Third day, different location. We parked down here. We walked up this draw. And as soon as we got into the woods, we cut tracks 10 minutes from the car. 3 days, 3 different locations, 3 different cats. Okay, again, when you got them around, plenty of evidence. The one thing I didn't see, or we didn't find when the 4 days I was out there, was a kill. This is Kerry, one of our directors. Kerry was out there with Jay a couple of years before me, and they were tracking a female who led them to one of her kills, which was an elk calf. So every winter, after the first snowfall in the Northeast, we've got 1 million hunters out there in the woods in New York and New England. Hunters, trappers, houndsmen, snowmobilers, cross-country skiers, birders, and plenty of these folks are good woods people who know exactly what they're looking at. And no one is coming back with anything like this. All right, so we ought to be seeing plenty of kills if the cats were out there. My other point here is to illustrate, again, what cougars eat, which isn't us, not very often. Okay. There have been about 140 incidents. I don't call these attacks because they're actually preying on us. Okay. They're not mad at us and coming after us for that reason, or territorial. They're actually preying on us. So there have been about 140 incidents and 22 deaths since 1970 in the United States and Canada. Almost all of the cats that are implicated in these incidents are young juveniles out on their own for their first time. Okay, cougars aren't raised or trained or evolved to hunt us, but every once in a while a young cat decides to take a crack at us. And 2/3 of the time it's a kid for the same reason they're going to go after a fawn or a yearling deer. You see, most of them have occurred in Colorado, California, and look at Vancouver Island, British Columbia. Vancouver Island's about the size of Maryland. What do you think is going on Vancouver Island, British Columbia? They have so many incidents. Any ideas? Not lack of prey.
Too many cats.
Not too many cats.
Invading their habitat?
Not invading their habitat.
Fish habitat?
No, Vancouver Island has the most liberal hunting policy of mountain lions in North America. It's not quite open season, but it's pretty close. And hunters want to take the big toms for the same reason they want to take a big buck. The problem is that big tom gets to be there. He gets to be 4, 6, 8 years old because he doesn't tangle with pets, he doesn't tangle with livestock, and he doesn't tangle with people. He's smart. That's why he's lived that long. You take out one of those guys, guess who replaces them? 3 of those guys. So they've effectively lowered the average age of that population, and that's why you've got so many incidents on Vancouver Island. Sport hunting destabilizes predator populations. It doesn't matter if it's mountain lions, wolves, coyotes, bears. You kill too many of them, you start seeing these kinds of problems. California, looks like you have a lot of incidents. 5,000 cats, 58 million people, no hunting. So they actually have the lowest ratio of cougar incidents because there is no hunting and because California is our perfect test tube of what it's like to coexist with mountain lions, where there is no hunting. They police themselves, right? And the longer they live next to us, the smarter they get, and the number of incidents go down. And we have a lot of research, continuing research, coming out of California all the time to prove this. These number of incidents in California have gone down over the last 10 years. What animal do you think kills more people every year than all the wildlife combined, not counting us?
Insects.
Not dogs, not insects. Not bears. Vehicle collisions with deer. Kill 200, injure 20,000, and cause $6 billion in property damage every year. We spend $2 billion a year on all wildlife in the United States. Deer cause $6 billion in damage. Most of that money is raised on the backs of deer from hunting licenses and hunting gear sales. But yeah, deer. This is 1 month of deer incidents versus 47 years of cougar incidents. How often do you read about someone dying, getting killed by a deer? Every time you have a cougar incident, it makes international headlines. I'm not trying to minimize the fact that these happen, but I just want to put it in perspective. There have just been 3 deaths in the United States since 1998. The most recent was in New Mexico 9 years ago. Okay, let's talk about evidence. Maurice Honecker is the grand old man of Cougar research. He studied them in Idaho back in the 1960s. 20 years ago, Maurice predicted that lions will hit the Mississippi in the next decade. The East and Midwest are beautiful cat country, full of deer and cover. Okay, again, they're coming out of these source colonies in the western prairie states. How do we know they're getting to the Mississippi River? Well, never mind going out and looking for evidence. Wherever they are in the lowest densities, we get what's called incidental evidence. They get hit, they get shot, they get treed by houndsmen 3 days in a row in Wisconsin. They wander into towns and cities. Kansas City, Omaha, St. Paul, Minneapolis, Chicago, but not Cleveland, not Pittsburgh, not Buffalo, not Albany, not Lake Placid, not Boston, not Portsmouth, not North Conway, not Portland, not Bangor. 300,000 remote wildlife cameras are sold every single year. Okay, the landscape is saturated with them now, not to mention all the cameras that the NSA has out there and all those drones. Cougars wander in front of those all the time. Right, this guy wearing wearing a radio collar, okay, tripped a whole series of cameras across the Upper Peninsula of Michigan and Wisconsin during a 3-month period. We knew it was the same cat because he was wearing that collar. So boom, 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 just like breadcrumbs. These photographs stop at the Upper Peninsula of Michigan and middle of Tennessee. We have none further east. Despite having more hunters, more cameras, and more deer, these pictures stop in the Midwest. Okay, so let's talk about these sightings. We get hundreds of them up and down the East Coast every year, and for the last 17 years, people have been sending us photographs of their sightings from time to time. Very often, they're partial photographs like this one. So you can't see the tail, the coat looks right, but look at the back of the ears. White. What did I say about cougars earlier?
Black.
Right. So what do you think that might be? Not a dog? Not a coyote? Bobcat? Anyone say bobcat? Got a bobcat, okay. That's a bobcat. Yep. Bobcats have the white dot on the back of the ear. A couple of years ago, a bobcat came into right behind the hotel and was hanging out on one of the railings next to the big lake lounge, and one of our secretaries got a couple minutes of video, and he kept turning his head, and you could see those white dots in the back of his ears. So this is a bobcat, reported as a mountain lion. Okay, again, you can't see the tail, spotting along the flank, so maybe it's a young one, but white on the back of the ears. Another bobcat, reported as a mountain lion. Fred Scott looked at the different cat species and found out they have different body characteristics for different species. So cougars have small heads and long tails in proportion to their bodies, whereas house cats have big heads and short tails in proportion to their bodies. And then bobcats fall somewhere in the middle, and of course they have that shorter, stubby tail. So we get a photograph like this. We don't have to go out and measure the corn or the grass. We can tell from the body proportions that that is a house cat reported as a mountain lion. Another house cat reported as a mountain lion. So it's hard to believe that folks are indeed mistaking cats as big as us for house cats and bobcats. We did not expect this to happen, folks. I mean, our founder had an experience like this, all right? But this is what we've been seeing for the last 17 years. Paul Beyer is the first biologist who studied mountain lions in the suburbs in Southern California between San Diego and Los Angeles. At the end of his study in the mid-1990s, he went back and counted all the times he was sent out on a cougar call, and it turned out to be something else. 95% of them were misidentifications in cougar habitat. Okay, so what does that say about all of these sightings that we get on the East Coast where we can't find evidence? And then we get pictures like this. First reported to us from Cornwall Bridge, Connecticut. How do we know that is not Connecticut? Yep. Very good. It's ponderosa pine, which are native to the Rockies. And we also see some aspen trees back there. All right. So we had a pretty good idea that this was not Connecticut. But that didn't stop this picture and the series that went with it from going viral. And people were sending them to us from up and down the East Coast. My brother took this, my cousin took this, my uncle took this. 2 weeks later, we found out it was taken outside of Casper, Wyoming. A couple of years ago, one of our rangers at the hotel got this picture sent to him, reported to him from Minnewaska State Park. I hadn't seen it before, but I didn't try to track it down until the Mohonk Preserve contacted me 2 weeks later saying it was on their property. So I did a little Google search where, okay, we have deciduous forests, but since we don't have mountain lions here, where do we have mountain lions in deciduous forests? The Upper Great Lakes. So I Googled Upper Great Lakes mountain lions. And this picture popped up from Minnesota in 2011. Which begs the question, why do people have to hoax these photographs? Why are we getting them like this out in the Midwest and out west, but not on the East Coast? Because yes, cougars are incredibly elusive, but they betray their elusiveness all the time. We get pictures of them even in their most intimate moments. Nursing in the Santa Cruz Mountains in California. Moving a den in Florida. This is that video I was talking about earlier. 3 minutes of handheld video through a windshield of a pickup truck of a deer kill. Santa Monica, California, northwest LA. The easternmost photograph we have of from a cell pick and a tree stand is Indiana 9 years ago. Millions of hunters up in tree stands with cell phones now every single year, and this is the easternmost photograph we have.
What about that person who was standing there on the road? The cougar would not try to protect its food, so then she just walked by?
Yeah, that was a cyclist. Yeah,
Cyclist.
yeah. They are not very territorial, and they're not aggressive that way. I'll talk about that a little bit later. Believe it or not. And then you get incidents like this, Boulder, Colorado. Okay, how come they're not coming up to people's porches on the East Coast like that? All right, tangling with people's, or hanging out with people's cats. They get trapped. Bobcat traps, coyote traps, wolf traps.